Here. My name is Kent Newman. I've been on the Sustainability Task Force in Des Moines since 2017. I live in the Union Park neighborhood near the Des Moines River, Birdland Lagoon, where we've got lots of white pelicans today. Taking a break, I think, due to the weather. I was the city energy advisor for 2 years and have been involved in sustainability and energy efficiency for about 20 years. I'm a co-founder of the Des Moines Bicycle Collective with Carl Voss and Kim West, dating back to 2007. We opened in 2008. Let's just go quickly around the group here and briefly introduce ourselves and our connection to sustainability and transportation in Des Moines. Carrie has been our co-chair, I think, since the beginning. Carolyn, are you on the call?
She should be on, but she might not be. So Carrie Carney, 1000 Friends of Iowa. We are located on Ingersoll Avenue. My husband and I met through cycling. We met on the Burr Ride many, many years ago. And like most of our early dating time was all cycling. 1000 Friends works on responsible land use, transportation, and the intersection of climate change. And I've been with the task force since 2016.
You may hear a newborn making some noises in the background, but Jeremy Karen with the City of Des Moines. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager, also the Board Vice President for Central Iowa Trails Association, CETA, which is the local dirt trail single track organization that helps maintain and expand single track recreation activities throughout the greater Des Moines area.
I'm Mike Armstrong. I'm a transportation planner with a small consulting business called Small Solutions, DSM. I also work as a communications and policy advisor for the Street Collective. So you'll be hearing more from me later.
Okay. Anybody else want to introduce yourself?
I'm Carl Voss, and as Kent mentioned, one of the co-founders of the Des Moines Bicycle Collective, and got involved in advocacy for bikes and also with Amos, and led me to the Des Moines City Councils. And so I represent all of Des Moines as an at-large council member.
Thanks for being here, Carl. Carolyn, can you hear me? Would you like to introduce yourself? You're muted. I'm not sure she's hearing us. Well, maybe we should get underway. Thanks for joining us today, Mike and Carl. And I know you have a presentation prepared, so without further ado, why don't we get things started, and let's all save our questions for later on. But we've had a brief introduction, I think, to the way things were for a long time in Des Moines, and many of us have been riding here during a time of great change. There's a lot of improvements. It's part of what I think makes Central Iowa such a vibrant place today, and provides multiple benefits to the community, not the least of which is economic. Anyway, I'll let you guys get started. Thanks again for being here.
All right. Can somebody give me a yes if you can see my slides?
Yes.
All right. So as I said, I'm representing the Street Collective today, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about active transportation and some of the environmental impacts and outcomes associated with it. So before I begin, I want to start with sort of a bit of a story and a sign of hope. One of the difficult things with doing this kind of work is that we're often working on long time horizons. So we don't get to see the results of our work for several years, sometimes even, a decade or so. But we have this curious case of Los Angeles from 2020 that I think is a fantastic example of what could be. So for 19 of the last 20 years, the American Lung Association named Los Angeles the smoggiest city in the United States. As we all don't want to remember, March 2020 was sort of the start of the pandemic. And in April, the city of Los Angeles underwent a relatively strict lockdown. And since that point recorded their longest streak of clean air since data was first recorded. So they were seeing blue skies, clean air, and the only real change was the number of car trips being made every day. They hadn't changed their infrastructure, they hadn't changed, the buildings they were using or made a massive switch to electric vehicles. It was just the number of trips went down and they immediately saw a change. And this was a sustainable change as long as those trips remained down. And this is fantastic. We rarely get to see the proof of if we made these changes, this is what the outcome would be. So I always like to keep that in mind, even though nobody's thrilled about thinking back to 2020. So for the Street Collective, we're here to champion active transportation options that are accessible, safe, and enjoyable for everyone. So when we talk about this, we mean walking, biking, transit, small personal mobility devices, all of the ways that have activity involved for getting around. And, something like transit certainly does. We've seen that when people ride transit, they actually walk much more than if they're driving. And again,
Excuse me, Mike.
Yep.
I don't think we are still seeing the title slide. Is that true for others? Okay. We're seeing your deck along the left, but it's, for some reason it's not advancing. So I think you need to put it in play mode or in, open up your first screen all the way, and then you can go from one to the next.
There we go.
All right, we're back in it. Yeah, pause me for a second. Thanks for, feel free to stop me for things like that. I love it.
I walked away for a second, so I came back and I thought, wait a minute.
So let's talk about where we are today. What are sort of the current conditions that we're working in? We have cities, and City of Des Moines is no different, that have a lot of legacy infrastructure that are for driving only. And when we talk about trying to get more people to walk or bike or take transit, the current conditions don't allow for most people to do it, and certainly discourage most people from doing it. We don't choose to be walking on a gravel shoulder, or if we're in a personal mobility device, using a left turn lane in order to cross the street. It's because these are the conditions that are. And so the people that have to travel in this way do their best in a bad situation. We also know that only 1% of the city's streets carry at least 80% of their maximum capacity during peak hour. And so you can imagine for the other 23 hours, there's even more sort of wasted infrastructure, excess capacity that we're not using, but still has that massive environmental impact. And this is what we always try to keep in mind whenever we hear people talking about widening roads, adding new roads, talking with our top priority being congestion or commute times. This is where we come back to that we do have, a peak 15 minutes of congestion. That's a little frustrating. But when we look at what we've built and what we're trying to build going forward, we know that we have a lot more than we need. And we'll get into why this is such a negative for the city. Now today, we're talking about this from the angle of sort of climate change and environmental sustainability. So we know that there are rapidly changing needs and stresses put upon a city and a region because of climate change. We also know that transportation is the biggest source of CO2 emissions. For the US, I believe it's 29%. I think for Des Moines, it's 26%. And we're hitting a lot of tipping points of what we're putting into the environment is causing greater and greater negative outcomes, as we'll dig into here in a second. So when we look at what we've done for the past 70 years, when people talked about transportation, and whenever you look at city and statewide budgets for transportation, decade after decade, we see examples of there are roads, you start to feel a bit of congestion, and people complain about this congestion, so we add more lanes, which means that, hey, we don't have congestion for 3 to 5 years. And then that congestion comes back as more people move into the suburbs because it's even faster to drive into the city. And then traffic increases and those new lanes are filled up. So we'll go back and we'll add more lanes. As I've said, we've done this for 70 years, and this is Houston. This is sort of one of the worst examples of it, but we can see that at the end of millions and millions and millions of dollars of investment, adding more and more asphalt, they're back at where they started, which is the same amount of congestion, the same amount of stop and go traffic during peak hour. This takes a toll on our air quality. So Americans take 1.1 billion trips per day, or 4 per person per day. And it is not the same how you travel, which we all know intuitively, but looking at the numbers, sort of an average of private vehicles, so cars, SUVs, trucks, put out about 9.96 pounds of carbon per mile, while diesel buses put out 0.64, bikes put out 0.07, and I'll get into why this is. It comes down to life cycle costs for that. And overall, Des Moines ranks 137th out of 202 metros for annual particle pollution. So this is a very local problem for us as well. One thing that we feel, but we may not think about as much, is that the temperatures change based on the built environment. And extreme heat is the most dangerous weather phenomenon in the US. So more people die from extreme heat than any other, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, whatever else you want to put up there. And when we add so much pavement, whether it's streets, parking lots, buildings as well, if they don't have green infrastructure with them, all of those are spaces that absorb heat and hold on to it. So that our downtown core, our industrial centers, even our suburban centers, can be up to 6 degrees hotter than over green space or rural areas. And every degree makes a difference in this. And we're seeing more and more studies of people doing sort of street by street analysis, and there are differences street by street, based on street trees, building materials, all of these other pieces. But this is something that has a major impact, especially as extreme heat becomes a greater issue. It's Des Moines, we have to talk about flooding. Everyone knows the term 100-year flood. The 100-year flood happens a lot more often than once every 100 years. Our people who have been here for a while can name off the years, the flood of this year, the flood of this year, and it keeps happening. And there's pieces to this. One is that we're an urban area on a river, downstream from some poor flooding mitigation. So all of that water is going to come through and it's going to overrun its banks whenever we have major storms. But you add on to that the amount of pavement that we have. I think City of Des Moines is up to 2,200 miles of streets. All of that is land that cannot absorb water. That speeds up stormwater, creating more flash flooding conditions. There's other impacts that I'm happy to talk about another time, but I'm not going to go in depth on, but noise pollution, drought vulnerability, you know, all of these other pieces that come into our transportation system and what outcomes come out of it. And so before I talked about how bicycling has a carbon impact, which you generally wouldn't assume, when we think about the climate or environmental impacts of transportation, we want to talk about life cycle impacts. So there's the vehicle component, you know, manufacture and transport of that vehicle. And some of this are things that we wouldn't think about. So electric vehicles are an improvement, like, great, I love that people are adopting those. But they also require a lot of rare minerals to build the computer chips and the other parts that go into that vehicle. The fuel component is what everyone thinks of. Are you on gas or diesel, electric, hybrid, hydrogen cells, whatever it may be? And then finally is the supporting infrastructure. So if you have a bunch of cars, you need a place to drive those cars, you need a place to park those cars. What does that mean for our environmental impact? So, why active transportation? This is a pretty comprehensive study. I highlighted a few of the key ones for City of Des Moines, but this is comparing those life cycle emissions from all of the different modes. So DART is moving towards fully electric buses, and that is the bus BEV, battery electric vehicle. The private cars, again, the BEV, that is a fully electric battery vehicle, and that is an average of cars, SUVs, trucks, the full gamut there. The standard car, so gasoline cars, and then bikes, and this breaks into what their emissions are. And you can see that electric vehicles are an improvement, but they're not a wholesale solution because they have the exact same infrastructure requirements as gasoline vehicles, and they have the same manufacture costs as gasoline vehicles. It's just the fuel difference. So that's an improvement, but it's not going to hit any sort of aggressive climate action target. The buses is a huge savings, and even more so biking, and they don't even bother including walking because I guess the only carbon impact is what you're eating for lunch, so before you go for your walk. So choosing to ride your bike instead of driving just once a day could reduce your personal transportation related emissions by 67%. Again, I think to achieve sort of aggressive climate goals doesn't mean that nobody is allowed to drive a car again. There are people who absolutely require a car in their daily life. There are reasons for driving a car. There are purposes for that function. But as I said at the top, we're all making on average 4 trips a day. How do we reduce those trips by personal vehicle? Whether it's gas or electric, how do we switch some of those to buses, to walking, to biking? And we will see a major impact from that. So the other side of things is that infrastructure side. And there is sort of an inescapable geometry to this. So no matter how efficient our cars get, the size of them does not change. And if anything, our cars are getting larger and larger. So if you're going to move 100 people through a city street, they are going to take up so much more space than if you have a bus, if you have a train, if you have people walking and biking. And all of that pavement is stuff that does not absorb rainwater, that absorbs heat and retains it to be released at later in the day. And here is the Des Moines picture for it. So again, when we're thinking about our street specifically, these things make a difference. And it's not, you know, all about what is New York or Portland or wherever else doing. There are changes that we've made in Des Moines that have pushed us closer to those goals, and there's more that we can do. So for community organizations, what are we doing to assist with this? We run our community bike shop, as mentioned earlier, started as the Bicycle Collective, became the Street Collective to incorporate walking and transit and these other pieces. But at the end of the day, one of our core responsibilities is programming bicycle donations and recycling to reduce environmental impacts, bike giveaways to get bikes in the hands of more people, classes and rodeos and bench time and all of these things to empower people to walk and bike as part of their daily routines. And the Street Collective always has a do it together principle. You know, we are here to help build skills. We're not here to do things for you. We also run the bike share system called B-Cycle. Currently 27 stations in city of Des Moines and 3 suburbs, running 170 bikes. Some of them are the traditional bikes, some are electric bikes, with 7,000 members, and we're still growing. So this has been running for 12 years now, I believe, 12 or 13, and year over year, we're seeing sustainable growth in this and sustainable use. That this is important for people to have the option. And with the addition of electric bikes, we're seeing those options grow. So it's not just if you're at lunch running across town, you know, if you work downtown, we're also seeing more of those commute trips and longer trips to the suburbs. We run bike valet. It's important for, you know, if you do want to ride a bike, that the infrastructure is in place for you to do so. And the collective runs bike valet at pretty much all of the major events. So if you're at the downtown farmers market or Yankee Doodle Pops or whatever else, you will see safe, secure, and visible parking so that, you know, if people want to bike on typically very traffic inducing events, it's easy and safe to do so. And we bolster all of this with education and advocacy. So making sure that decision makers have what they need, that the public understands what the stakes are and what sort of the trade-offs are for each project, and building those coalitions to keep moving this forward. And when we think about moving forward, we think about the money that is currently present. You know, we always hear that there's not enough money to do things. In the 2023 capital improvement program for City of Des Moines, there was $131 million spent on sort of transportation relevant projects. Now, this is a very soft number. Those categories incorporate a lot of things, but we know that this money is being spent on bridges, on streets, on parking, on related infrastructure for transportation projects. Every single one of those dollars needs to have in mind sort of the environmental impacts going into it if we're serious about climate action goals. So what we ask is that for every project, for every policy that we're considering as a city or as a region, does this increase individual car trips or miles traveled? Because we know that those are the greatest polluters and the greatest potential for change. Does this project or policy make it harder to walk, bike, or ride transit? And finally, does this add more pavement, more storm sewer needs, further stresses on the electric grid or other supporting infrastructure? So again, we're looking at the life cycle idea of environmental impact. So we want to know, you know, what change does this affect for how people get around and the type of infrastructure that we build? Because we know that there is very rarely a project that's going to come across that's going to maintain the status quo. Every investment we're making as a city is putting us closer to those climate action goals or further away. And so we need to have that top in mind every time we're making those decisions. So Ken, I guess it's up to you if you want to do questions now, or I'd be happy if we rolled straight into Carl and then do questions together afterwards.
What would you like to do, Carl? Thank you, Mike.
But on time, maybe we should do a pause and just handle a few questions now for
Sure.
Mike that and dispatch those if we could.
That sounds good. Any questions for Mike?
Let me jump in just briefly. Hi, my name's Russ Verplug. I don't mean to be lurking in the background, but I lost connection there earlier. I was going to introduce myself. I'm an architect with Verplug Architecture and in Des Moines, and I'm a LEED accredited professional. So I'll leave it at that. Good program, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mike?
This is Jeremy. I have a question for Mike. Has the Street Collective done anything to, one of the things that we're seeing in cities that have higher penetrations of electric bikes, along with regular human-powered bicycles, is the speed difference and potentially needs, for like a complete street to actually incorporate a lane for EVs or electric bikes versus standard bikes. There's accidents that are happening between regular bikers and electric bikes that are moving a lot faster and more with the speed of traffic. Have you seen some examples of how cities have handled that? Obviously, we're not at that penetration level here yet in Des Moines, but something that could be an issue if we can grow the bike culture and expand e-bikes in the community. How do we manage that, and what would that look like for our engineering, traffic, and planning departments to start thinking about?
Yeah, so some of it may end up being a bit of a moot point. So there are a few different classes of electric bike. I believe under Iowa code right now, what's generally allowed is e-bikes that go up to, I think it's like a 19 mile per hour max on the electric bikes, but typically run up to like 15 to 16 miles per hour. I have an e-bike that is that type and I ride it, and I regularly get passed on our trails and bike facilities by people on standard bikes. There is another class that goes up to 28 miles per hour. And that's where some of that conflict comes in. I think for the short to midterm, that differentiation, say on Ingersoll, would be that the speed of traffic in the separated bike lanes would typically be closer to 12 miles per hour based on the street lights, the number of crossings, all of those different things that kind of make people slow down and all of that. And if you want to fly down to Ingersoll on a high-speed electric bike, or if you got the strong legs on your road bike, you can ride in the lane with traffic, which is typically safe as long as you're riding the same speed as traffic. So I think that's where we want to make sure we're not restricting. I know City of Grimes a while back looked at like outlawing bikes on the road if there's also a bike lane. So I think that kind of undercuts our options, but for the most part, and definitely for Iowa, the e-bikes you see around are going 14 miles per hour, about the same as most people biking. I don't think it is a significant concern yet, but it is worth keeping in mind as we move forward.
Great,
Um,
thanks, Mike.
If I could just weigh in there briefly. So Jeremy, there may be some anecdotal cases where that's happened, but there's probably more collisions called by e-scooters running into pedestrians than there are type 3 bikes. So those are the fastest ones
Great point.
running
Carl.
into other bikes. So
Yeah,
I think many of us are frustrated by the gasoline motor powered bikes that you see around today, and it's like a cross between a bike and a mini bike, but they're faster. It's a different one, you know, than some of them are real bicycles with a 2-stroke motor on it, really smoky. And there's one guy that has been on the trails quite a bit, but I also see a lot of motorized vehicles on the trails, especially the Neil Smith, with everything up to like even a 3-wheeler, 4-wheeler.
Yeah, and so for Iowa code, anything gasoline powered does not qualify as a bike. But as we all know, enforcement is a tricky thing.
Of course, catching him. Any other questions for Mike before we move on to Council Member Voss? Mike.
okay, well, I'll jump in here. You may be aware that those in the group may have read or heard about programs in other cities and other states to incentivize purchase of e-bikes. So I want to just introduce this topic to you, and I think the next slide Mike might have is about Denver's program. And so they launched this in 2022, and this provides assistance for purchasing an e-bike. And as you can see in the bulletin items, it's $400, call it a rebate, for locally purchased bikes, e-bikes. That would not be, so that would be a local bike retailer, not an online purchase, and up to $1,200 for income qualified purchases. So that's, I think the number I saw was 80% of AMI. Additionally, additional assistance to buy a cargo bike. So the example on the right is a kid cargo bike. There are also other cargo bikes that would be like boxes for serious grocery getting. So Denver made a $4.7 million investment in this. Part of this is driven by a 0.25 cents environmental sales tax that not only went toward their program like this, but other Denver programs. I think in some information Jeremy shared with me, they have about 40 employees in their environmental group. So anyway, they have some good numbers now. 90% of the participants rode every week. And I'm not sure, I haven't seen Mike's final, is there another page on Denver? Well, no, I guess not. So in Oregon, their legislature, let's just say it's different than our legislature. They have gone through a first subcommittee reading and onto a second stage where they have a similar incentive to what Denver has. They're asking statewide $6 million for their first 2 years, and I think I can pull up some additional information. $1,200 for residents that are 80% of the AMI. They also have a program that for their e-bike incentive fund that will accept other donations to expand the program. So as proposed, the Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality would gather the demographic data at the point of sale and get asking for optional survey information should the user want to provide for how much they intend to use the bike, how they're going to use the bike, and their mileage. So I'll just spin back briefly here to Denver. They found that about 45% of all the bikes purchased were cargo bikes. 29% of the respondents.
Okay, it's still bouncing. Okay. So let's close that.
Should I keep
Carolyn?
going, or-
Could you mute?
Your computer.
Carolyn, your audio is working now. We can hear the librarian. I think Carolyn said she was at the library and having
I think it
trouble.
would be Ishi, don't you?
Uh-oh.
Well, for me,
Okay, I think she heard me. Good.
Uh,
Hopefully she can hear it now.
All right, 29% of the respondents were new bike riders. And I want to repeat that, 29% of the respondents were new bike riders. Averaged about 26 miles a week. I've seen other studies that show that e-bike riders ride more often and longer than traditional strictly pedal-powered bikes. Each bike replaced about 3.4 round-trip vehicle trips. The Rocky Mountain Institute estimated that about $1 million was saved on fuel and electricity. So anyway, that gives you in broad strokes. Now, the question is, could we get something like this in Des Moines on the ground? So too late for the current fiscal year 24, which ends June 30th of next year. But so I just floated an idea with some of my council colleagues just to have something as a pilot program of $100,000 toward rebates, and I got no traction. So I'm going to need some help if we're going to make this happen. I think the Denver numbers are going to be, when you open your mind to, well, what did the Denver program look like? So Denver is just to give you an idea, Denver, this was operated in the county of Denver, 710,000 people. And as you know, Des Moines is about 212,000. So 3 times easily larger than Des Moines. But
I think when I ran the rough numbers, Carl, we were looking at about 1.5 million to have a program with the same capacity as Denver's, if we were going to do.
right.
I would add also that Denver started out with $850,000, and the demand was so high that they, just kept it going to see where they would get in the first year. And
Well, I think they used up their initial response just in the first week. So, but I think some key numbers here are the number of respondents who are new bike riders and how often that they're leaving their car parked and choosing to go by bike. So we know that in the Des Moines area that most trips that people make are shorter than 4 miles. So do you think something like this could work in Des Moines? Are we ready for something like this? Or,
Yes.
or should we wait until it's too late?
Let
I'm
me
sorry.
let me ask a question. What do you think is like the biggest barrier to making it happen?
Yeah, well, Harry, my thought on this is that, decision makers say, well, I can't imagine doing this, or people that show up at the neighborhood meetings. Well, I don't ride a bike. I can't imagine why anyone else would ride a bike. And again, as Mike said, we're not asking people to give up their car. Just are there trips that they could make by car? So, I mean, just as an example, I rode my bike all the way up to Veterans Auditorium from the East Village. So is that a mile? Boy, I don't think it's a mile up there. And so there was a community foundation luncheon today. Lots of suits around the table. I was the only one on a bike. And people were complaining about how far the parking was. So, I mean, I got rock star parking. I got parking right by the door. So, so
I would say,
yeah.
sorry, I would
Sheila.
say as a person who loves to ride my bike, but now I am older and heavier, and my biggest challenge is no matter where I go from my house in Beaverdale, I'm quite often going down into the river valley, but then I have to come up out of that valley on my way home. And having an e-bike would be the solution to my dilemma. You know, even though I own a Prius, I want to be able to not have to use my car. And I think there's a lot of people like me, you know.
Sheila, you are just spot on. I have a friend, Steve Larson, who now lives at Scottish Rite. Steve's 84,
Mhm.
and he got an e-bike 3 years ago. If you stop and talk to Steve on the street, you just have to count on it. He'll tell you it'll be a half an hour discussion. And so he lived until Steve and Carolyn lived in Beaverdale until they moved to Scottish Rite last year. And he said, you know, I'm amazed at how flat Des Moines is with an e-bike. So,
Oh, yeah, right.
yeah. So he just presses the button and climbs up Ingersoll or, you know,
Yeah.
where. So
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
e-bikes have really changed the landscape. And I would just love to see a program that would incentivize, especially those that would financially qualify
Mhm.
for.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned earlier about the sheepdog trials, so I compete in sheep herding competitions. And one of the things that I see is really interesting. It used to be that people would bring golf carts with them to those events because you're in big farm fields. And now everybody has e-bikes that they use getting from their camper over to the trial field and stuff. So
Yeah.
people want to use them. I do wonder, so I know in Denver or in Colorado, there was state legislation. I don't remember if it was legislation or if it was specifically guidance that came from the DOT that was requiring priority given to modes of transportation or transportation projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm wondering how much that had an impact on this. And I know we probably are a long ways off of seeing that in Iowa. But I'm curious, like, I guess I don't know what I'm curious about.
Well,
Can I just say something quickly? I had a thought too that, man, working as an attorney, and I've done a lot of earlier in my career, I was doing more public defender kind of stuff. And there are a lot of people in this town who have lost their license because of, small things, and they can't afford the fines. And that would be a perfect, and they can't get to a job. They can't get a job because they can't get to a job. And that would be like a perfect target audience for this kind of program, that at least a certain percentage went specifically to people who have lost their license and need it for transportation.
I would add that one additional challenge that we have in Des Moines, that we have developed such a rich trail network, yet our on-street accommodations are not as
we need
healthy as St. Paul, Minneapolis, or Denver. So there's that issue also.
I think
And
we
there's
should start
still some
looking at
gaps.
Yeah,
in-
we need to
in
look
those-
at what kinds of streets are going to be good to target as bike boulevards,
Yes,
exclusively bike boulevards.
up myself,
Yeah,
because I
Jamie.
Tucson in the winter, and we have those crisscrossing the city. 193 miles have been developed so far,
Mhm.
and they're fantastic for walking and for bicycling.
Yeah.
And Mexico City has bike lanes down the middle of their streets. I remember seeing that.
I want to mention some of the economic factors. Our transportation accessibility is really a social and environmental determinant of health. That's an area that I've been working in as a video producer, and now more as producing some educational materials for people in healthcare. So that, there's a lot of interest in saving money on healthcare. Cleaner air, equals a lot of healthcare savings for people that have lung issues. Ingersoll's experience with the retail sector, some saying that they actually had a better traffic after the bike lanes. There was so much controversy about the Ingersoll bike lanes. There's several people on the forum today that have ridden in Des Moines for a long time, both Russ and Randall. And these guys are friends of mine too, and Carl. We're all part of the Royal Mile group that meets every Friday at the Royal Mile at 5. Anyone's welcome to join us.
Bicycles help
Well-
for that too, so you don't have to drive.
Especially if you're a cyclist. Yeah, especially in the summertime on the patio.
I'll add anecdotally, I lived in Boston before Des Moines, and I rode my bike all over because it took me an hour and a half to get to work on the train. Even longer if I took a bus, and it was 20 minutes on a bike. And half of my commute was on Boston streets, and half of it was on the trail along the river. Uphill both ways, actually, at the end of the ride. An e-bike would have been fantastic. I didn't have as many demands on my personal time when I lived there. Now with a family and pets and everything, and needing to run back and forth to the house, an e-bike would be essential in order for me to be able to commute via bicycle. And then I have the other challenge of living on the east side up by Grandview Park, and there's no real safe protected bike route to get downtown. There's a gap in the Gailey Wilson from the end of MLK to the beginning of the Gailey Wilson out, where that ends in Pleasant Hill. That's projected to be filled in the future. But I think we need to do some mapping exercises to really figure out where those corridors are to target bike infrastructure, working with our engineering team, and get those corridors, those main corridors built out, and then expand street infrastructure from there. And then my last point, I know we've piloted bike lanes several times. I heard there was one on Hubble before I moved here that they tried out. They tried out the one in the East Village. And I feel like from my experience, when those get built out, I don't know that we're really putting our best investment in those. We kind of half do them with inadequate signage and not the proper markings on the, you know, the, what's the word I'm looking for? The medians and different things that we put in with those. And I think that would go a long way to, you know, helping car drivers understand that they're sharing a road with bikes more if we executed those properly, rather than kind of haphazardly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jeremy. I'm on the Who's Writing Des Moines Facebook group, and there's been, I don't know if anybody else is part of that group, but there's a lot of chatter on there about, like, people haven't been happy with how the bike lanes are kind of playing out and feeling like they're not always safe. And so I think safety is definitely, we really have to think about that. It's how do we do these bike lanes so people feel safe and comfortable riding them, and that cars are paying attention to them.
Well,
Okay.
we need to lower the speed limit in this town too. I mean, Iowa City speed limit is 25 miles an hour. Why is it 30? Why is 30 acceptable? I don't understand that. And it's way more dangerous 30 miles an hour than 25.
Well, so I think at our last council meeting in April, April 24th, we're supposed to see the first draft of the Vision Zero plan, and I hope everyone on this call will take a close look at this. It's an important document regarding speed limits in school zones. In other communities, they're as low as 15 or 20 miles an hour. In St. Paul, the speed limit on the streets is 20 miles an hour. They have signs that say 20 is plenty. The police officers there give you 5 miles leeway, so you wouldn't get a ticket there until you were driving 26 miles an hour. Here, it's generally accepted that you have a 10-mile gimme over the posted speed limit. So there's a lot of opportunities for improvements. There are many cities that invest more in, they're called continental crosswalks. It's like a Abbey Road type of zebra stripe of crossroads that make it challenging for drivers to see and pedestrians to feel safe in the crosswalk. Anyway, the Vision Zero plan will be huge. We have to approve it. Council members have not even seen a draft of it yet, and yet we're supposed to approve it in time for the city to apply for some federal funding. I think it's either the end of June or July. There's not a lot of time to review this document. So if you see information about open houses, to look at the Vision Zero plan, I encourage you to attend.
Carl, once that a deadline is hit and assuming the council approves the plan, is that plan still then amendable? And like, is there going to be measurement and, you know, that kind of thing?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like all of a sudden we have to rush because the federal government changed the deadline to apply for these one-time dollars to improve infrastructure and safety in communities. And we can't apply, I was told today, for another 8 years. So this is kind of like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So like
Well,
I think we're spending about $240,000 on this Vision Zero plan for outside consultants. And we're not going to get a real long look at this. We can compare what other cities have done and see, because we're not the first city to have a Vision Zero plan. We cannot apply for the federal funding without having a Vision Zero plan. So,
Right.
Is that zero casualties? Is that what that is?
yes, it's zero fatalities or serious injuries
Okay.
for motorists, bicyclists, pedestrians. So
Yeah,
that's the goal, is to drop it down.
yeah.
I'd be happy to share an article by Jeff Speck, who wrote about this and how American traffic engineers are not taking Vision Zero seriously, how European cities have already embraced this and they've reduced their fatalities and serious injuries. So,
Can we import some European traffic engineers?
Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, good luck on that.
Well, Amsterdam looked a lot like typical American city 20 years ago, right?
Mhm.
There's been a lot of work done by a lot of people to make it what it is today.
Mhm.
Carl, if you send me a link to that Jeff Speck article, we can share that with our list.
Okay, I'm gonna send that to you right now, and then I've got to scoot to another meeting, so
It is
appreciate your
6:30.
time. I'll be
One-
happy to take up any follow-up questions, okay?
One
Thank you
thing I
very
want to
much,
touch
Carl.
on
Thank you,
that Carl
Carl.
that
Thank you,
Carl
Carl.
introduced with Denver's program is that there is the overarching 25-cent climate tax that the city has adopted. I think Portland, Oregon has a similar one. Ann Arbor has adopted one as well. Any city that has been able to make significant progress on implementation of their climate action plans has been able to pass through some sort of longer term, more sustainable, dedicated funding source to make those projects happen. And so I encourage you to think about, what that might look like for Des Moines, if it's something that would fly with Des Moines voters, and how we might be able to think about making that a reality. Because that would put significant funding into the sustainability program and allow us to ramp up with staff and partnerships and everything we need to do in order to implement that plan and fund an e-bike incentive program on a larger scale. So,
That's a great idea. And, better integrating those different departments,
mhm.
which is what people need to really be thinking about, how these things are connected. And, I think economics can help drive this too, because it is a better investment of public money when we don't have to build new infrastructure all the time. We can use what we have there.
Yeah.
But use it
Economics and
wisely.
equity as well.
Equity as well. That's right.
A lot of these initiatives are allowing, like, a lot of people who do not have licenses have to commute via
Us.
either the bus or a bicycle or walking, and e-bikes present a more equitable option for them, I think, for personal mobility around the city.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
do. Oh, go ahead.
I would also, come back to that idea of like, we have the money to do a lot of these things. It's the choices we make. So we have 58 million going into the Southeast connector of new roadway and expanded roadway. And we're having a hard time finding 100,000 to do an e-bike incentive program.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got a question maybe for Mike. Are there any statistics about bike flow between Des Moines and any of the suburbs? I don't think there are a lot of trail connections, but I just wonder if this could become something, assuming Des Moines even gets on board, council people. I just wonder
So-
if this could get larger.
Yeah. So the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, has done trail counts for at least 10 years now. And a lot of those focus on the connecting trails between city and suburbs. The Des Moines B-cycle, now that we have stations in Windsor Heights, Clive, and what's the last one? I think they're working on West Des Moines right now. But we have our trip data for those too, and starting to see some of the numbers there. So none of it is perfect data, but there is enough out there to tell the story that, you know, biking is not just the 20-somethings who live downtown and work at, you know, Principal or something. It really is a regional thing. It's a transportation, not just a recreation function. So the numbers and the data is there. We just need to pull it all together.
So
Do you think
just
Dart-
with that question about like connecting with the suburbs, you know, I'm wondering if there are opportunities to look at how to do some of this with the suburbs. Last night, the city of Urbandale adopted a climate statement and approved to move forward with climate action planning. Their number one source of emissions is from transportation, and that's going to be one of their priorities, is thinking about how they're reducing emissions from transportation. And so I'm, you know, just kind of thinking about that. It's like, how do we kind of reach out, especially with the MPO's work on, you know, doing greenhouse gas emissions and stuff? It's like, how do we connect with some of these other suburbs? Are there opportunities for us to say, hey, if we partner with Urbandale and Johnston or something, maybe we can like create more of a regional incentive program or something like that? I don't know, wondering about opportunities.
Well, and we should get the information from DART too about how many bikes they carry annually. Because that can be, if we can start getting more, you know, commuter busing going, there might be a certain segment that, you know, they don't want to deal with being sweaty in the morning, but they'll take their bike to work and then ride home 10 miles, you know? That's my suggestion. That's what came up for me.
I'd also add, there's been some more recent talk, the original, can't remember if it was the infrastructure bill or the Inflation Reduction Act, carried funding to provide a federal e-bike incentive. That was cut during negotiations. Those discussions have apparently been renewed, and looking at potentially providing some sort of federal level e-bike incentive. So that's something to watch out for too. And then there may be an opportunity for Des Moines and to spread out our funds a little bit more and tack them on as an addition to a federal incentive, if that becomes a reality. So maybe we can do a little bit lower incentive that attaches to the federal one and then helps people buy it down further and make our money go farther. Something to keep an eye out on.
Let me ask another question, Mike. Jeremy, you can answer this too. Do we think that e-bikes are kind of the low-hanging fruit for active transportation? Like this, are we looking at this as kind of our best option to kind of get the ball rolling? Is the first part. And the second part is, how are we like looking at, you know, I know what's in the proposed climate action plan, but how are we looking at kind of improving like walkability and making sure that, you know, people will walk if there's something to walk to, you know, if they have resources in their neighborhoods, if the grocery stores down the street and stuff. I hardly ever got in a car when I was living in Beaverdale. So those are my two questions.
Yeah, e-bikes are likely the low-hanging fruit for the existing transportation infrastructure, right? When we talk about what would have the greatest impact, I think it always comes back to land use decisions, but that is not something that happens quickly, and you don't see the changes of that for quite a while. So I think as we continue to address gaps in the network, e-bikes is a way to, as you've all said, like flatten out those hills, bring places closer together, as well as building up more of that, more people with skin in the game to support these transportation projects in the future. From the other side of it, I mean, you know, we have a new transportation plan for City of Des Moines. We have all these gaps mapped out and what needs to happen, but none of this is legally binding. So it comes down to budgetary decision by budgetary decision. Are we moving closer or further away to active transportation being a viable means for the most people?
I'd also add on to Mike's comment. E-bikes do seem like the lowest hanging fruit. I think if we're gonna put our money into something, focus on e-bikes. I think one thing we haven't talked about here is scooters, e-scooters a whole lot. And from my experience in other cities utilizing e-scooters and managing, not working for a city managing scooters, but like navigating around them while they're strewn across the sidewalk. I think that poses a lot of challenges that could detract from having a more dedicated e-bike program if we just focused on those, and maybe hold off on the e-scooters as a mobility option right now.
Yeah, City Council has pretty firmly come out against scooters, and many of those companies are folding or contracting at the moment, still based on pandemic impacts. There are always going to be some scooters. I know several people in town who own them, but in terms of like a shareable everywhere kind of thing, I don't think Des Moines is at all close to having them. And there is just a lot more of that unfamiliarity, discomfort with them versus e-bikes that for all intents and purposes function the same way as a bike. And, you know, we're used to seeing them as long as we're not seeing the super high speed or the gas powered ones. It'll feel like a natural extension of what Des Moines has done for, you know, decades now.
So I have a question. I guess, oh, maybe not. I was just thinking, do e-bikes, they're not going to need any kind of charging infrastructure, are they? That's it, you charge as you pedal, right?
These are for the private ones, but no, there is a battery that does need to be recharged.
So is
So
that
any
something that
e-bike.
should be put on the list of infrastructure for these?
No,
It's a nice to have, like it's a luxury. You know, if public parking, like if the DART parking shelter for bikes wanted to have charging stations there, great, but largely, you know, you can ride 30 to 40 miles on a single charge and you can charge it in your house at the end of the day. For B-Cycle, our stations, the docks that we have for them, charge the bikes. You're not allowed to just leave them willy-nilly. They have to be returned to a station.
I'm just wondering
There
about,
are street side bike racks that have integrated chargers that cities can purchase and install on the sidewalk. And they have like a built-in, more secure locking system than like your typical bike lock. And you know, they're able to withstand winter weather conditions and stuff. I've talked to a few vendors at some shows about them.
because
Parking
I'm
will be
thinking
a significant thing for this, as you know, this is going to be the most expensive bike most people have ever owned. There's already not enough parking as it is, so secure parking will be crucial.
right.
I think we still have opportunities to attract more people to conventional bicycling as well,
Mhm.
because it is exercise, and I think because of the robust social scene that we have in Des Moines, you know, the bicycle culture that we have.
Mhm.
And, you know, I'd like to see, personally, would love to see more Black people there, Black and brown people, you know?
Mhm.
And I think it's possible.
The one thing I would throw back to our old hands, especially on the Who's Riding group and some of those, there is certainly a small but very, very vocal gatekeeping force. You know, we got some pretty aggressive and at times violent comments about the Ingersoll bike lanes, that everyone should learn to ride with traffic in the middle of the road. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be biking. And that's one where like, it's a very small portion for the most part, like don't feed trolls, that kind of thing. But there are also people who reach out to city council members and that really mixes messages.
That's interesting. Yeah, you know.
Are
change-
those cyclists, other cyclists you're talking about? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
You know, you're always going to have some of that elitist snobbery, which is, you know, it's misplaced and they're just not thinking it through. And I think you're right. It's best to, you know, as much as possible, ignore it. I wanted to just circle back to the question about charging stations because, Jeremy, I was glad to hear that you've seen some bike racks or whatever that have charging, because I'm thinking about, you know, like there might be people who live in multifamily housing places that don't have external charge access. So, you know, they have to maybe take it into their home or something. You know, I don't know. That might, but those bike racks might be a way to address that.
It might be something that multifamily developers are going to consider too in the future.
It would make their places more attractive, I would think, you
I
know.
think there are already some where they have bicycle parking.
Well, and that's something that I think
Covered.
we need to start requiring of developers too, and we need to have that, we need, you know, we need covered parking, we need more parking, we need more lanes and boulevards and all of these things. So, but you know, I'm really proud of what Des Moines has done so far. I'm really impressed, and I think you're right, Ken. We have a wonderful culture here, cycling culture. It's really strong, and you know, we need to. Once this plan comes out, let's pass it around and have people look at it and get some good feedback on it, so that we can do it right the first time, or at least, you know, do it excellently the first time.
I think the transportation plan is already out. The plan that's going to be unveiled later this month is the Vision Zero plan.
Oh, the Vision Zero, right, yes, yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jeremy. It's been very educational. Many of us are passionate advocates about this, and we think about it. And those of us that really think about sustainability and the ultimately the carbon footprint of something, and you know, like calories in, calories out. What's the equation there? It's a existential challenge we're all facing right now. So I think we all appreciate being able to talk to others who have some understanding of it, and some are really involved in it. And Mike and Jeremy, Carrie, Carolyn, I think many of us as citizens are involved in it, want to be more involved in it. So thank you again. And anything you think that we should share with the group, please share with us. We could probably share the link for the transportation plan. We can let people know about the Vision Zero plan and the importance of maybe attending one of those public meetings, or there's probably going to be an online survey too, I imagine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we would love to have, the Sustainability Task Force is organizing, we're looking at sometime in June to do a walking tour of the 6th Avenue Complete Streets project. I know the Street Collective was involved in that, so we'd love to have you guys part of that walking tour. So hopefully we'll get that date nailed down pretty quickly and we can chat with you guys about that also.
I'd also throw out, we did the bike tour last year of 4 Mile, and that was very heavily attended. I think we had 20 or so people, faces we'd never seen before at these meetings, that showed up for that. And so we've talked about hosting another tour, maybe not along 4 Mile, maybe focusing on another trail system. But that's something that could be coming up later this summer too.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I have to go now. Hey, thanks, everybody. And thank you, Kent, for setting this up, and
Of course.
the rest of you. Good to meet you.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you
everybody.
guys very much.
Good night.
Right.
All right.
All right, Carrie, thank you. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to grab coffee anytime, or, if anyone has other questions, I'm always available.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Oops. I would love to sit down and have coffee. I'm actually meeting Jeremy's new counterpart with the sustainability department, used to work at DOT. And her and I are talking tomorrow. I mentioned before everybody got on about trying to pull together a group of people to start thinking strategically about ways we could move the DOT. So I'll keep you posted on that. But definitely there's a number of things coming up that we're planning that we'd love to be involved with you guys, have you guys involved in it.
Great, sounds good.
All right, very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. You have a good evening.
Yep, you too.